the other day, Allan.
I'm Wayne County Treasurer Eric Sabri. We are living through unprecedented times. As a result, the Michigan Homeowner Assistance Fund was created. This fund, administered by the state of Michigan, is designed to help homeowners cope with pandemic-related hardships, such as delinquent property taxes. Residents may apply for up to $25,000 to help cover 2019, 2020, and 2021 tax years. Previous year's taxes must be paid in full or in a payment agreement with the Treasurer's office. Eligible homeowners must have a qualified financial hardship that occurred on or after January 21st, 2020. You must currently own and occupy your home as your primary residence and must have owned it since January 21st, 2020. To see if you qualify, please visit waynemetro.org, call 313-388-9799, or email taxinfo@waynecounty.com. We're here to help.
Good morning, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of The Week That Was. My name is Saeed Khan, and a lot to talk about this week as well. Joined as usual with a great lineup of people to go ahead and provide their analysis and assessment. We're joined by attorney Bill Seikaly. We've got veteran automotive journalist and editor of Headlight.News, Paul Eisenstein, veteran journalist Nancy Derringer, and of course, Deadline Detroit co-founder Allan Lengel. Well, I think it goes without saying that the House of Representatives is a house divided, but it seems like even there's a house within the House that's divided, as government shutdown is looming large next week, and the Republicans have all fled D.C. today for some reason. Must be the equinox. Speaker Kevin McCarthy seems to be on fairly shaky grounds because he can't even corral his rather petulant group and caucus of Republicans in line. It seems as though he's facing quite a bit of rebellion from people like Florida Representative and prototype for butthead Matt Gaetz and others that are looking at whatever kind of Faustian bargain he made with them in order to be the speaker, that any one of them there, that's Beavis.
Oh, whoops. How about, there we
go.
There you go.
It really is, it's a striking resemblance.
I'm trying to figure out why you're insulting Butthead.
You're absolutely right. Mea culpa. But it looks like things are now precarious for two reasons. That it's not just about cooperation with the Democrats, which is always elusive with this current Congress, but now the kinds of dissensions within the ranks could then have an impact on whether or not we have a shutdown, especially amidst rumors that Trump has been enabling the rebellious Republican members of Congress to shut it down. What's going on?
I mean, I thought it was interesting that Trump made a statement encouraging them to shut down the government so they can defund the Justice Department so they won't be able to prosecute him. Now, here's a guy who's looking out for the greater good of this country. I think Kevin McCarthy has just been held hostage the whole time to this little rogues gallery. And at some point, it's got to collapse. And perhaps it's going to collapse under all this bullshit. But it's like the Republicans keep fucking around to try to shut down the government. It's just...
Well, Allan, there's an important point to remember, which in typical form, our fearless, foolish leader, number 45, will not understand, is that the courts are considered an essential organization, and thus they cannot be defunded. We would have to have the Treasury go down to zero with no borrowing power before they would shut down the courts, and that would block the prosecution of Trump. So that's typical of him, not understanding how things work, and it won't help him at all.
And George is not affected.
Yeah, and I'm also wondering if this isn't just another example of how Trump's post-presidential record of being able to snatch defeat from the jaws of victory work, because if he keeps this up, he's going to make it almost impossible for the Republicans to even dream of getting a majority again in the House in 2024. We know that the public hates government shutdowns. Even Newt Gingrich has weighed in saying, don't do this. And there's a lot of opposition to a lot of the other things that the far right wing of the Republican Party is doing. So a shutdown would almost ensure such frustration that would add to the obstacles they have to face next year.
Bill.
Yeah, let me weigh in on a couple things. First of all, Nancy, I just want to point out that Allan dropped the first F-bomb. You didn't.
I got a few more in my saddlebag.
My analysis, Paul, while I respect your observations, my analysis is a little different. First of all, it demonstrates that Trump is willing to bring down anything and everything, including the entire government, for his own personal benefit.
Right.
That is, I think, the key to and the theme throughout this, because Allan, the shit show may be collapsing. The question is how. And I think, from my observation, this is a real test of who Kevin McCarthy is. Up to this point, he's been more concerned about having the speakership than he is about anything else, including the American people. He's going to have to face this now. The answer to any respectable, serious politician would be, we're going to take at least 6 members of the Republican Party, have them vote with the Democrats to get a clean bill through. It's not going to be palatable from a partisan point of view, but it is clearly what the American people need and what our economy need. So if this man has any integrity and any sense of wanting to be viewed in history as anything except a gentleman of the evening, if you will, and a political whore, if you will, then he needs to do the right thing. Unfortunately, I think that people are much more concerned about staying in power, having their position, and they couldn't care less about what the ultimate outcome is. And Paul, from your mouth to God's ear, this should result in the Republicans not ever being able to have a majority in the House or Senate for the next 20 years.
Well, you just hit something very important, and I think if this were baseball, he'd be going 0 for 2. I don't think the man has even a remote sense of how to govern, and he is neither going to figure out how to get a few of the more reasonable, and there are a few more reasonable Republicans, to join with the Democrats to overcome. For one thing, he's not willing to risk in any way having his Republican colleagues vote against him. And as long as he decides that he's going to maintain an asylum, he better be ready to accept that he's one of the weaker inmates in the traditionally dominant position. It's really odd for somebody with the keys to basically not use them.
Then comes the question, how soon is before, I think that's an interesting term, the reasonable Republicans, the RRs, I guess that's a new term instead of rhinos. How long is it before they turn on him? I mean,
so it looks like there's two.
Do you allow the country to collapse before you say, you know what, I'm never going to get elected again if I don't stand up to this, and that means going after McCarthy if you're on the reasonable wing of the Republican Party? Not even sure what that. I'm not sure those.
Bill, it looks like there's 2 House Republicans who are signaling that they're willing to work with the Democrats. Freshman Mark Molinaro and Mike Lawler from New York are looking at doing this. McCarthy, if he wanted to, could tell George Santos, why don't you masquerade as a Democrat, since you're pretty good at shapeshifting? But Nancy, is that going to be enough to deal with McCarthy's congressional cuckoldry?
I don't know. That's a good question. I think anybody. I mean, the not unspoken, but the fear has always been, don't primary me, bro. And if any Republican votes with the Democrats, that's virtually assured to happen. However, who knows? I mean, some of these districts are full of RRs or rhinos or whatever. I mean, it would be probably unwise for somebody from, say, Alabama or parts of Indiana or parts of Ohio to do this. But if you're a Republican serving a suburban or exurban, probably more suburban constituency, and you've got a record and you're willing to stand on it, I think you could get away with that. So I don't know. I mean, this is one story that I feel it's like the world's most boring and stupid football game. It's just every day it's like, oh, this happened overnight. It's like, well, there's a big surprise. I mean, now Matt Butthead is now apparently in charge of the House of Representatives. How do we feel about that? I mean, I got a little ranty the other day on my Facebook, and I put up a thing about Birch Bayh because I was thinking about Birch Bayh for some reason. And Birch Bayh was, of course, a senator from Indiana. He was a liberal, at least, by the way we would define it now. But Birch Bayh, who was turned out of office by Dan Quayle, of all people, he got shit done. I mean, he worked on 2 constitutional amendments. He was the driving force behind Title IX. And it's like we have forgotten that Washington was never supposed to be a reality show that enriches Rupert Murdoch and, a few fringe lunatics that can parlay this into a speaking circuit career like Marjorie Taylor Greene and Lauren Boebert. And by the way, remind me to tell you my Lauren Boebert revelation this week. But anyway, it's just, I mean, we were supposed to do work for the American people to, make our lives better. And that's something that Birch Bayh did. And that's something that virtually no one in Congress right now is interested in doing. So,
well, lest we all forget later, Nancy, why don't you go ahead and share us the story about Lauren Boebert that apparently was transmitted to you by the Archangel Gabriel himself.
I thought I had heard I mean, I am an old lady now, and I thought in the course of my lifetime and career working in foul-mouthed newspaper, profane newsrooms, I thought I had heard every possible euphemism for various sexual activities. And then I found a new one on Twitter last week where somebody said, after the video leaked of Lauren Boebert and her date groping one another in the theater at Beetlejuice, somebody said, there he is playing the topside bongos.
Oh.
It just made me laugh.
By the way, her new nickname is Gropert.
Gropert, yeah, that's a good. Yeah, Lauren Gropert, that's a good one. So
she originally denied vaping, and then she later apologized.
Right,
sort of.
Yeah,
sort of, and she blamed being in an unfamiliar environment because
cultural environment.
I guess she's only really used to being in a Republican-controlled house, a shooting range, or a really cheap dive bar.
Yeah, I was gonna say a titty bar. So yeah, that would be standard reason.
I don't know. I don't think it's out of bounds for people to be that animated at a musical. I mean, I seem to recall "O Calcutta."
But playing the topside bongos is a new one.
And for any of you under 50, I apologize for that rather archaic reference. You would probably know it better as now "O Kolkata," because they changed the name on it. But this whole idea about Trump and his encouragement or hair. Yes, thank you, Barb. We miss you, Barb.
Yeah. Hair.
Let the sunshine. Right. In Trump having this kind of influence as a Svengali on the House of Representatives, but also it seems as though his Jedi mind tricks were working on some of his underlings regarding the Mar-a-Lago documents. Alan, you have video.
new reporting in the investigation into Donald Trump's alleged mishandling of classified documents at Mar-a-Lago. ABC News and the New York Times are both reporting that a close aide to Trump has told investigators that Trump told her not to talk about the boxes of documents. Here's the exact line that she says Trump told her, quote, "You don't know anything about the boxes." Now, this assistant is Molly Michael. This is not an unimportant person in Trump world. She worked closely with Trump in the White House and then followed him to work in his office at his Florida resort. She resigned last year. Now, according to reports, she also told investigators that Trump would write to-do lists on documents that were marked classified.
I'm actually surprised.
As George Costanza would have said, is that wrong?
See, I'm surprised Trump isn't like Sacha Baron Cohen in the movie The Dictator, where General Admiral Aladdin changes all these words to Aladdin. I'm surprised he didn't change the word dumb to Trump. You know, just play Trump on this one, honey. But
well, don't you think she's unreasonable? I mean, as loyal as Donald Trump has been to all of his followers, why would she turn on? It's ridiculous.
And they're only the best. They're only the best.
Yeah,
the best.
Yeah. I love the idea of him writing on documents, like little notes and stuff. Like, hey, do we have any scrap paper? Oh yeah, you go. That's top secret. Don't worry about it.
Photographs of
I'll
North Korean missile
declassify it
sites?
later.
Right. Yeah.
Actually, Alan, I think
thought
on
about
some of these,
declassifying it.
I think on some of these documents he drew a circle to be the coaster for "Put Diet Coke here."
Exactly.
Wow, but he seemed to double and triple down with Megyn Kelly, and even in the rather unfortunate Meet the Press interview, in saying, "Oh yeah, well, you know, I had the right to these documents," and then also throwing shade at Molly Michael. In part, it seemed that he has a real problem with alliteration, and now saying that why would I possibly even hire somebody named Molly Michael, which he did.
What? He said that?
Well, he didn't use the word alliteration, but yeah, he's been going around bad mouthing her as well. Of course.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Well, look for her next paycheck to bounce if it hasn't already. So.
But here you see the slow erosion of Trump's case, and it seems as though he's making the case without even having to take the stand. These can't bode well. I don't even think he's so stupid to realize that this couldn't be entered into evidence as exhibit A through Z, and then coming back around to double A through double Z.
Yeah.
I've represented people like this. His strategy is not to go to trial. He has no plans on going to trial. He has one plan, and that is to become president, where he can can pardon himself. And if that doesn't work, I mean, I think it's unfortunate, but I think he can. The pardon powers are that broad. I think that's a shame. I think we ought to do something about it, all that. But I think he'd get away with it. But I think more importantly, he figures I can delay through all this nonsense, including getting judges disqualified or getting them to blow up at me so I can take that up to the Court of Appeals on a motion to recuse, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. He's how old? 79, 78?
77.
77. He's 77. All he really has to do is dodge this for 10 years.
Yeah, and then die. Right.
And then die.
Yeah.
So I think his strategy is not his lawyer's strategy. No lawyer would tell you this is a good strategy. No lawyer will tell you can get away with it. I have fired clients for adopting this kind of strategy before. But people come up with these kinds of strategies and they pursue them. But it's clear to me, I think Donald Trump is evil. I don't think he's completely stupid. Maybe he's tone deaf, but I don't think he's stupid. So I think he knows what he's doing. And unless he's really, really, really stupid, he must have a plan. And I think the plan is to delay, make sure he never goes to jail.
Mm-hmm.
What he's always done.
Yeah.
He's always done delays and just overwhelm any opponent by spending more money on legal. I don't think it's going to work here. Bill, I really think that he's angered even with the rare exception of the nutjob judge in Florida who is just plain incompetent. I think in a significant number of cases, the people he put into office, I should say on the bench, are reasonable judges. They may have a very different position. They may be more politicized, but I don't think he's going to be able to get what he expects to delay. Particularly in Washington, I think she is doing a very good job. She's shown a reasonableness at every level, falling short of what critics would like in terms of muzzling him, and actually leaving him enough room that he continues to put his foot in his mouth. So she's actually making for a better case by letting him continue to speak.
I agree, Paul, but I think the analysis is a little bit deeper. I think the reason he's been successful in the past is that that's all been civil litigation. He's never faced this kind of criminal litigation.
I absolutely agree with you.
And so he can throw money at lawyers, question whether he actually pays those lawyers, but he can throw money or throw lawyers at people. And then when he's ultimately in real trouble, he can buy it off. And it's worked for him. The problem is that doesn't work in the criminal system. That same strategy that works so well in civil litigation fails in criminal litigation. Now, while I agree generally with what you say about the judges he's appointed, I'm embarrassed to say this. As a lawyer, I'm really embarrassed to say this. I'm not so sure you're right about the Supreme Court. I'm not sure that the people he's appointed to the Supreme Court will not ultimately save his rear end, which would be criminal. It would be the most embarrassing things. My wife argues that I shouldn't do this, but I'm getting so old it might not matter. But I think I would turn my bar card in.
You have to remember this: the Supreme Court has actually gone against him in a few cases where I thought they had an opportunity not to. I think Roberts is at a stage right now. He's not quite as ineffective as McCarthy. I don't think he's quite as corrupt as McCarthy. But I also think that faced with the prospect of having some of the clearly Republican, clearly radical right justices, he might have to step in. He might not make it easy for them to just give Donnie a pass if it were to reach there.
I don't know. Justice Jenny Thomas would not allow. Oh, I'm sorry, that wasn't. She's
well, Thomas, no. And the latest stuff that's come out about Thomas, today just shows how corrupt he is
with the Koch brothers. Yeah.
I would say, having covered federal law enforcement for decades, once the feds come after you, they've got a deep bench, and he can try all these delay tactics or whatever, but the feds are it's like in football where somebody finally grabs a running back and then the rest of the team just jumps on and makes sure he goes down. That's the way the feds operate. I think Kwame Kilpatrick saw that. Once they put they've got bench after bench after bench. If they start delaying tactics, they'll bring more people in to read discovery or whatever they need to take care of. But I agree, as he's planning on delaying until he gets in there. But I think the feds are really determined to try to get some conviction.
Are you saying that his squadron of hot female lawyers like Jenna Ellis et al. Is not going to be any match for the federal judiciary or for the U.S. attorneys?
I think so.
Well, even Jenna Ellis, I think, flinched a little bit of late. Well, Bill,
she's the one who's she's flinching a lot. Go ahead. Sorry,
I got a couple of wagers for you. One, I do believe that even as depraved as the majority of the Supreme Court is, they will not hold that the pardon power goes to the extent that a president can pardon himself, because that would then be everything that the founding fathers would have waged independence against. And the other is Mel Tucker is going to sue MSU.
I think we should.
Mel, I mean, I am amazed by that one. That is,
and that was a segue. We're going to talk about Mel. He's been notified by MSU, by the athletic director, of their intent to terminate employment. They gave him 7 calendar days to respond because pursuant to the employment agreement to terminate his contract for cause, he does have the opportunity to go ahead and respond. Is this going to court?
I think they're going to settle. They don't want all the shit.
Yeah.
They don't want all the shit out there. There's already too much shit. They're trying. I guess they're looking for a new president.
What? I mean, you're right. They'll probably throw $8, $9, $10 million at him, and he'll settle.
Yeah.
And give up the $90 million. But my God, one, he stands no chance if it does go to trial of winning. Not because of what he did. I don't know if it was consensual or wasn't consensual, but it was incredibly bad judgment.
Oh yeah.
And he's got that provision in his contract that this
moral turpitude.
Yeah, well, no, it's more than moral turpitude. You can't bring scorn on the institution because of your behavior. Look, I don't understand why you would have done this, other than people who get into power tend to become pretty arrogant and believe they're above it.
Even after that losing season last year, because I would have thought
that brought disrepute.
Yeah, well, but I would have thought. I mean, he's what, the second highest paid man in college coaching.
Yep.
And I would have thought that at the very least they would expect him to, dollar up on the hoof, so to speak. And he had a losing season. It wasn't like he went, 12-1 or 11-2. I mean, he went he really fucked up last year. So I thought he'd be on pins, and I mean, he'd be watching every step that he made. But I don't know.
I think for the new coach, they'll have a more specific contract beyond like moral turpitude. Like, 1, cannot jack off on the phone. 2, have much more specific, so nobody can say, "Oh no, wait a minute, there's some gray area there." No. It says right here you can't jack off on the phone.
What about a tablet, Alan?
Yeah, right. Well, that'll be in there too. That'll be a good lawyer will put all that in.
An electronic communication device.
Yeah.
Yes, I think if you just limit it to the phone, somebody might either go for an iPad mini, depending on size, or a full size iPad. So
I have to follow up on something Alan said, and I may be segueing too early, but one of the things I'm seeing that is firing up the troops, as it were, in the UAW strike is the huge pay that people like Mary Barra and Farley and so on are getting. Barra, all in, including shares and the like, was 29 million and change.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that this whole corporate greed thing is resonating with the American public. At what point does it ever become an issue where people start getting fed up with the money that pro sports people are getting, whether it's particularly in colleges where it's the coach at a football team that is by far the best paid person in the university,
the state, usually,
often in the state,
right?
And certainly in professional football, we just saw this with somebody getting knocked out in the first game, but will still collect
Aaron Rodgers.
Right? How much money is he set to collect? 100 million something? I mean, at what point do people start getting fed up with what these guys are being paid?
I think when
Nancy,
they start paying more.
Nancy, I think there's a neurosurgeon at U of M who's really pissed and knocked down a few pegs.
Well, no, it's usually not in the state. It's the highest paid state employee, because if it's a public university, it's a state.
I knew what you meant.
So, yeah, right. Okay.
I think, sporting events now are just so ridiculously expensive. I mean, not only the events, but also the concession stands and all that. It's like baseball is still probably the most affordable, and it's getting more expensive. I went to a game recently. I paid $60 for a ticket. I went with a group of friends
To see the
I
Tigers?
Yeah, I would have never
God.
paid that, but some guy, one of the idiots in our group, decided there were like 11 of us, and he says, "I got great tickets for $60." And it's like, it's the fucking Tigers. What are you doing?
You know, I think we're missing an opportunity here to go directly to Paul's comment. I think people are fed up with it, and I think that the real tragedy is that one of Trump's great appeals is that he talks about the fat cats taking advantage of you. You know, this populism. I understand the irony.
Yes.
Populism that he appeals to is about that. I mean, it is why that, you know, we still, in my opinion, have more that should unite us than separate us. Pay disparity should be one of those issues. I mean, it is simply ludicrous that somebody makes $29 million while the first tier employee working the line is making $15 an hour.
Mhm.
Hey, Paul, I have a question for Paul. With Donald Trump supposedly coming to Detroit or in Michigan somewhere, to Wayne maybe, to talk to the UAW members, how is that going to play out?
That's a good question. I'm interested in the answer.
And on
That's
the
why I
same
raised it.
to compete with the debate.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, it's an interesting idea. There are enough line workers who are hardcore Trumpers that he will get good turnout. I don't think he has any problem getting a reasonable turnout. It is interesting that Sean Fain, who has been less than friendly to Joe Biden, has been viscerally tearing apart Donald Trump. But there are a lot of workers who don't care. And remember, there's a sizable percentage of workers who actually bought in on the right to work side of the argument. I did a number of appearances on Channel 2 over the last 5 years with one guy who was probably the best known of these folks. And they don't give a damn what the union leadership says, and they are very, very much Trumpers.
Huh.
But you know, it's interesting. Trump went to a pre tailgate thing in Iowa for a football game, and a lot of students were like basically like flipping him the bird and tell him. So I wonder. I mean, is his plan to visit a picket line, or are they going to have actually a rally? Because if he visits a picket line, I would think that's kind of a mixed bag there, where some people
can't see him doing that. First of all, I'm not sure his Secret Service would be comfortable with it or anybody else. We know he'll do what he wants to do,
right.
But I would imagine he's going to try to get in a more controlled circumstance where he doesn't have to worry about possibly facing classic Democratic union members.
Yeah.
I have read an article that he's meeting with 50 UAW supporters, Trump supporters.
Because if you march in the Labor Day parade, you see a lot of anti-Trump sentiment and buttons and stuff like that. So he would not. I mean, generally, labor would not embrace a guy like that.
Well,
no, they will carefully control it. They will do what they can to make it look like his support is much broader among the workers than it actually is. But remember how the workers voted in 2016 in particular. There is a strong base of support for these guys among these guys.
Boy.
So Barb just chimed in and says that Trump will shoot himself in the foot. I think, Barb, if he does that on Fifth Avenue, he'll get away with it.
You know what? I'd like to see him shoot himself in the head and see if he gets it.
He'll definitely get away with it.
I'd support him.
So actually, as of 7 minutes ago, UAW President Sean Fain announced 38 new sites across the country will be on strike. And in fact, all parts distribution centers at GM and Stellantis are on strike.
GM and Stellantis.
Yeah, interesting.
Yeah.
Huh.
I was over Channel 62 doing analysis with them this morning when before and after Fain spoke, and it was quite intriguing to listen to him. And he did everything but ask Jim Farley to cuddle up for a snuggle. He was very, very positive about the way that Ford has been working, and I've not been surprised at that. I expected that Ford would be likely to be the one to come up with an eventual deal first. He took a few shots; they're not there, and so on. But it was certainly as close as Fain would come to saying nice things about an automaker. He also, more importantly, left Ford out of the equation so that they are not going to be hit at their parts depots. And remember, the parts depots have a twofold effect. In some cases, they help various assembly lines, but they also serve to provide parts to dealers. So the Stellantis and GM dealer network, they're going to start feeling it very, very quickly when they start running out of parts.
And what about Canada? How does that work in terms of Canada has agreed? Ford Canada has reached a contract. How does that impact here, or is that sort of telegraphing what might happen here, or how do you read that?
Well, first of all, the auto workers in Canada took a decidedly different approach to these negotiations. They went in saying that they wanted to work positively with the automakers and took to a more traditional approach with them. Fain broke all the rules from the beginning and decided to negotiate simultaneously with no individual strike target. We've never seen that before. They've dropped the term strike target in the past, but there was always one maker, which they finally focused on, gave a temporary reprieve to the other two, and then got a deal. Remember, there was a 40-day strike at GM, but not the other automakers 4 years ago. So what will it mean? I'm not exactly sure how it's going to affect them, but you may wind up seeing Canada impacted to some degree because there's a lot of parts that go back and forth across the border. Just like the Wentzville plant that was hit in Missouri, another GM plant has basically had to lay off thousands of workers because they don't have the parts they need to continue operations.
Paul, did the UAW in Canada or the CAW in Canada have the same give backs that the UAW did?
Yeah, they had a number of give backs. They've had changes. So their contract.
Did they go to the two-tier system? And
I'm gonna apologize because I don't remember where they are right now with the two-tier. I don't want to put my foot in my mouth. I believe they still had it, but I'm hoping somebody will text in if I'm wrong. I can't remember for sure.
And what's your evaluation of Shawn Fain? What's your read on him?
Well, number one, I always thought he wanted to strike. For a whole bunch of reasons. If you listen to what he says, look at the decor, if you will, around him. I think Fain is reading the tea leaves better than I might have thought even 3-4 months ago. All the polls are saying that Americans are shifting more and more to support unions. There's been some good victories, a few defeats of late. UPS was a great example. There are more big contracts coming up. He mentioned the fact that the deadline for the contract with Mac workers is coming up in a week or so. And so I think he's reading properly that it's now the time for laying out a case for workers to get their share. He's big thing on two-tier wages, which I think connects with people who feel like, they're getting cheated even more than some other workers, some colleagues. Cost of living allowance is a big issue. I think that resonates across the United States. And I think Fain may be trying to position himself and the UAW yet once again as the folks who really are the powerhouse, the drivers of the labor movement in the U.S. Now, I'll add one more thing. The thing that I will be watching is how this all shakes out and how people view what he's done once they do get a settlement. because the UAW has failed for over 30 years now in being able to organize other non-big three plants. This has been one of the biggest failures in the labor movement, and certainly the UAW. They have not been able to get any Honda, Toyota, BMW, and so on organized.
Tesla.
And yet we're seeing more and more of these transplants coming in part to take advantage of the incentives that they can only get building EVs in the United States. So they're going to be more and more non-unionized plants. They've got to figure out a way to make themselves appealing. And a record contract, if it's seen as being an effective round of talks, could help make the pitch. If I had to give a bet, I'd say that the plant most likely, the two plants maybe, most likely to unionize would be those operated by Tesla. There's a lot of anger there. Elon Musk does not like his workers. Elon Musk, yeah.
And hasn't Elon Musk, hasn't he told the workers, if you try to unionize, I will not give you shares of stock in Tesla?
He's done all sorts of stuff, which some people say would be illegal, and there are battles going on. He does look. Elon Musk wants to save the world. It's the people, including his workers, he doesn't give a flying fuck about.
Yeah.
Can I just say? I was just going to say, when Tim Scott, in his desperate effort to gain relevancy and a headline here and there, came out with his declaration a few days ago that it'd be pretty simple in my world. If you strike, you're fired. I am really, really, really glad that the UAW, with everything that they had on their plate, made the time to file, or what was the official action they took against him, Scott? Did they sue him? Did they, I forget what they did, but they said essentially, you don't get away with talking that way in the United States of America. I don't care how MAGA you are. I don't care that you have a lovely Christian girlfriend that nobody knows anything about. It's like, you have to pay for that bullshit, because it's against the law. I mean, you can't just walk around talking like an idiot like that, and unless you're Donald Trump, in which case
you can say all sorts of stupid things. It's your action,
right? Well,
in some limited cases, it can be seen as interfering with organizing rights and so on.
Mm-hmm.
Well, this is the same Tim Scott who Tim Scott who last week threw shade at President Biden for not being at the Pentagon on 9/11 while he was flying back from his visit to Vietnam. So, I mean, I think it's interesting how they're jockeying for position. I think Vivek Ramaswamy is so wanting to be the new Trump. I think he told his wife to change her name to Melania. I
have one quick.
Go ahead, Alan.
I have a quick question for Paul. Why is it, and maybe we've kind of touched on a little bit, why is it that the UAW has had such a hard time organizing like the Honda plants here in the U.S. and Toyota plants? What's the incentive for workers not to join the UAW?
All right, so for one thing, the automakers have traditionally been very, very good at reading the tea leaves of sentiment within the workforce, and finding just how far they can directly go or indirectly go, often turning to their allies, say in state government, to encourage workers to see the UAW, unions in general, as the enemy. There's no surprise that there's no foreign-owned assembly plant in Michigan. They have traditionally gone into non-union states, some of them like Tennessee, that they're virulently anti-union. So that has helped. They have, though they're officially not supposed to, they certainly take steps to try to sound out workers in whatever way they can get away with, to find out if they're anti-union or at least not pro-union when they hire them. And then they've been watching whatever comes out of each contract, and they boost the numbers just enough. So you get $5 an hour less, but you don't have to give anything in union dues or what have you. So they've traditionally, the UAW in a sense is negotiated for the non-union plants, because whenever they get an increase, the automakers generally try to come just far enough up to keep their workers happy and maintain their anti-unionizing sentiment.
Yeah, I would also take this back to, to this populism that has brought Trump in. This populism that has brought Trump in has been anti a lot of things, including unions. It's been anti-employers, anti-unions, it's anti-everything. And that's created a huge problem. I think you can trace this actually back to Reagan, but
yes,
back to Reagan, and also, Scott Walker with right to work in Wisconsin, and then that having a domino effect in 2010.
Right. A couple quick things, because I was searching the internet while other folks were talking. Nancy, that Tim Scott, they filed an unfair labor practice, which I don't think will go anywhere, but it's an unfair labor practice act with the Labor Department. But interestingly, I looked at the Canadian auto workers. Apparently, the first time that we went to a two-tier system, it was 85% of what other union workers were making. They took that hit, and it took about 18 months to get back up once you got hired. They've never gone down to the 70% that the UAW were. So they do have a two-tier system, but it's not as draconian, if you will, as the American auto workers.
Okay.
So speaking of Canada, as of course Ford has settled over there, kind of a little bit of an international incident happening. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau standing up in Parliament, accusing the Indian government of Narendra Modi of committing an assassination on Canadian soil of a Canadian citizen by the name of Hardeep Singh Nijjar, an activist whom the Indian government had designated as a terrorist, for advocating for a separate homeland for the Sikhs in India known as Khalistan. This is turned into kind of a big deal because the Indians decided to suspend all visa applications. They have also gone ahead and removed all Indian workers at the Canadian Embassy or High Commission in New Delhi. And it seems as though there is now evidence provided to Canada by other members of the so-called Five Eyes, which along with Canada includes US, UK, Australia, New Zealand, that in fact Indian diplomats were recorded, their conversations and their correspondence being involved in directing this, what would be called a hit on Canadian soil. Seems as though it's a far bigger deal than even what is being covered in the U.S. Media.
Well, Justin Trudeau is not Donald Trump, and he's a sensible man. And my feeling is that he would not have taken this extraordinary step of standing up in the Canadian Parliament and making this accusation if he didn't have a pretty bulletproof case to do it with. So, I don't know much about this guy, though, the Sikh that was murdered.
He's dead.
I know he's dead.
Okay.
But he's also living in, he was living in Canada. He had been living in Canada for years. He immigrated from India to Canada some time ago, didn't he? Or did he?
Didn't he obtain Canadian citizenship?
Yeah, he was a Canadian citizen, for
He's
sure.
a full Canadian. And actually, Bill, the Sikh community in Western Canada goes back, in some cases, 150 years.
Right.
They came to the West Coast, some of them to Central California to farms and also to do forestry.
Right.
They left. They were pretty much forced out of America thanks to the Chinese Exclusion Act. Because back then, Congress people in Washington couldn't tell the difference between a Chinese person and a Sikh. You find that they are thriving. They are politically very well integrated and influential, and certainly even one of the heads, the head of one of the Canadian parties, the National Democratic Party, is in fact a Sikh. So this is quite a big deal. But it's kind of astounding to see the Modi government, which of course has been accused of being fascist and at the very least Hindu nationalist, try to double down and play a game of whataboutism, saying, well, what about the Israelis? What about the Americans? They have assassinations around the world, and except that they don't do it in democratic countries.
Yeah, allies.
Yeah, and allies. Yeah.
Right. I'd like to point out two things. One is, and I noticed a comment about this, I think this is the third. Is this a mere coincidence that the third Sikh separatist supporter is murdered? I'm not sure if those were all in Canada.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And actually, in Canada, Bill, they call that a hat trick.
You were really on today, Saeed. I want to go a step further than Nancy did, which I'm always afraid to do because I'm afraid I'll fall off a cliff, and say, in my opinion, I agree with what she said, that Justin Trudeau would not have done this without a lot of evidence. But isn't this what real leaders do? Mm-hmm. I mean, a real leader stands up. There's going to be a political cost for this. There's going to be a cost for this on the national stage in terms of what's going to happen to Canadians with Indian background. However, he did what people with character do.
Right.
He said, this is wrong, and we're not going to tolerate it. Mm-hmm. We're going to pay a price for it, but we're going to pay that price because it's wrong.
Right.
Yeah. Well, part of that bill is
have done that in the last God knows how long.
Well, and the Canadian parties are in unanimity on this. There is nobody taking the everybody does it, so shut up attitude. The Conservatives, the NDP, the Liberals, the Labour, even I think Québécois is on board with this, because of course it is an affront to sovereignty to have a Canadian killed on Canadian soil. And I think it's also important to remember that just last week, Trudeau was in Delhi for the G20 summit. I am sure he brought this up. He probably saw no tractability on the part of Prime Minister Modi, and probably even warned him that this is coming. So I think that the actions that he took, both you and Nancy are right, happened with an awful lot of evidence already there. Well, before we go to commercial, I think there's one item that we do really need to talk about that wasn't on the list, and that is that, again, only in Texas, a teacher was fired for showing the graphic novel version of the Diary of Anne Frank to 8th graders. And Allan, I think you've got a clip.
Texas teacher fired after assigning an illustrated Anne Frank book. The unabridged version does contain some elements that are removed from the abridged version. And this talks about Anne Frank sort of describing her genitals and talking about I guess you would call it, I don't know if it's confusion or wonder or, figuring out her body, discussions of menstruation, and a brief desire to kiss one of her girlfriends. That's in the unabridged version.
Unbelievable.
And that's from a 12-year-old's diary. And they're, and it's an 8th grade class.
And 12-year-olds, that's what they think about,
Well, I think the bigger point of confusion was some students.
Texas, these assholes. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah, but Nancy, students were complaining because they're like, "What the hell's a diary?"
Yeah. Right. Of course.
No.
Yeah.
It's from a bygone era. But yes, this is the assault and the onslaught on books as well. Mm-hmm. Okay. With that, Allan, I think we can go to commercial.
I'm Wayne County Treasurer Eric Sabri. We are living through unprecedented times. As a result, the Michigan Homeowner Assistance Fund was created. This fund, administered by the state of Michigan, is designed to help homeowners cope with pandemic-related hardships, such as delinquent property taxes. Residents may apply for up to $25,000 to help cover 2019, 2020, and 2021 tax years. Previous year's taxes must be paid in full or in a payment agreement with the Treasurer's office. Eligible homeowners must have a qualified financial hardship that occurred on or after January 21st, 2020. You must currently own and occupy your home as your primary residence and must have owned it since January 21st, 2020. To see if you qualify, please visit waynemetro.org, call 313-388-9799, or email textinfo@waynecounty.com. We're here to help.
And now,
Downtown Detroit, Robert Wells, Schmuck of the Week.
now, by the way, we do have the opportunity, if any of you would like, to add another category, Schmuck Goat, given the fact in honor of Rupert Murdoch stepping down as chairman of Fox News and News Corp.
Well,
if
you recall, when this show was started by Craig Foley, he decided that the one rule was you couldn't name Trump Schmuck of the Week because it was the title is named for him. It's the Donald G. Trump, G stands for Genius, Schmuck of the Week award. So there.
Yeah. Actually, Trump is so smart, he spells genius with a J.
Yeah. Donald, that's right. Okay. J stands for Genius. That was it, Jason. I'm sorry.
There you go. Bill, who's your Schmuck of the Week?
Well, this was kind of easy for me this week. Lauren Bobbitt.
Oh, you stole it.
Has got to be it. I mean,
Bobert.
Topside bongos.
That was Lorena. That was Lorena Bobbitt back in the 90s.
Boobert.
Yeah,
Boobert.
Gropert.
But I mean, the hypocrisy in her behavior, in her conduct, and her positions in the world. It's not just her, but she personifies it in so many ways. The positions that she takes, she's with a guy I'm kind of proud of, actually. He owns a
bar,
a gay bar, where they have drag shows. I'm kind of proud that he got her to do this in this movie theater. And I wonder what she was vaping. It's the only thing I haven't really gotten clear about. But she is clearly my Schmuck of the Week. I did want to suggest that we may want to consider, and I'm going to blank on her name and I can't find it. We might want to do a Mensch of the Week, because there was a Democratic Congresswoman who proposed a bill about Kevin McCarthy, the Kevin McCarthy Shutdown Act is what I think she called it, that would cut off pay to every member of the government shutdown.
Right.
Sir, I've forgotten her name. Somebody will remember it. And she would be my Mensch of the Week, because I think that was a great proposal.
That was a good move. Yeah.
This would be, I can get you her name, Angie Craig.
Hey, Craig, that's right.
Yeah. Not to be confused. Hopefully not the Wyoming where that senator was from, who loved bathrooms. Where is Angie Craig from? Let's find out. I actually, though, Bill, I think you're impugning Bobert's intellectual leaning. She's proven that she's a fan of Hegel, because her boyfriend was literally the antithesis of everything that she says. It was kind of like
antithesis.
It was like date night dialectic.
I can guarantee you she can't spell antithesis.
Okay. So, Bill,
by the way, Angie is from Minnesota.
Minnesota. Yes. Yes, she is. Okay. Paul, who's your Schmuck of the Week?
Well, I would have said Gropert, but we can't all pile on because her boyfriend already has.
I can give you one that is kind of in line with that. So, but that's okay. Go ahead.
I mean, let's stay with Congress, because Congress is doing such a wonderful job. It would be McCarthy. I mean, I'm trying to think of anything I have seen since he got the speaker's role, the speaker's gavel, that he has done that's been truly effective. He has danced. He has danced around everything, and occasionally things have fallen together almost by accident, but I don't think he's achieved anything he would actually be able to go back and say, look what I pulled off. Maybe I'm wrong, but I can't find it.
Paul, I think there is one thing. He
Oh,
became speaker.
well, I said after he got the gavel. After he got the gavel.
After how many votes? Was it 18 or 20?
It was a lot. A lot. I'm sure it was more votes. It was a higher number than Marjorie Trader Green can count.
Yeah.
That's only 3.
Yeah.
Okay. Nancy.
Oh, I can't believe that we've already done 2 and nobody has claimed my schmuck. I have 2 excellent schmucks this week, and I was gonna offer one to Paul, but that's okay. I'm going with Jan Wenner,
Ooh.
the founding editor and publisher of Rolling Stone magazine, who gave an interview. Apparently, they've repackaged some of the Rolling Stone interviews that he did with various gods of rock, John Lennon, Bob Dylan, a few others. And it's being published in book form. And he gave a Q&A interview. Yeah, The Masters it's called. He gave a Q&A interview with the New York Times and was asked in the course of this why he did not include any women of color, women or people of color in this group, why they were all white men. And he basically... He flipped them off. I mean, he kind of la-di-da'd, and he said, and but this is where it gets really bad. I mean, I think he could, if he had made the argument that, you know, these foundation stones of rock and roll, at least, you know, once you get past kind of the 50s influence, were laid by people like, you know, Eric Clapton and so forth. But he didn't do that. He dismissed women and people of color and he used the most loaded word that I think a white person can use in that context when he said they weren't articulate enough. Oh. And, you know, I've always kind of looked at whenever a white person describes a black person as articulate, and to me, it's just like a huge red flag. And it's, you know, it's a way to kind of dismiss somebody. It's a way to kind of say, hey, for a black guy, he talks like a white guy. But I mean, he essentially said that none of the women or people of color were articulate enough to be a true philosopher of rock and roll. And others have pointed out that Jan Wenner is a malignant narcissist who lives in a bubble very similar to Donald Trump, where everybody agrees with him all the time and yes bosses him all the time. And this was a very needed and probably won't do a bit of good wake-up call for him. And so I'm going to say Schmuck of the week. So,
and he's taken hits for this. He was going to do a couple of charity events. They've said, no, we don't need you.
He was removed almost immediately from the board of the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame.
Yeah.
And I understand, I've heard, and you know, the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame is not something that I keep on my radar, but I've heard from a few people who do pay more attention to it, that there are a number of great artists that he has essentially said, they're never getting in, you know, not while I'm on the board. And one of them is, of course, my beloved Warren Zevon, and who won a fan ballot this year and should have been, like, you know, in contention, a fantastic songwriter. And he supposedly was being kept out by Jan Wenner. So don't let the door hit you in the ass on the way out, Jan, and have a nice life. And please die in obscurity somewhere. So,
and a vote for the MC5, man. Bring them
the MC5. That's another one, exactly. That should be in there. So
yeah,
anyway, so
absolutely.
That's against the law. Never mind.
Yeah.
Time for you to kick out the jams, Bill.
Mm-hmm.
Allan.
Mine is Jim Jordan, who was chairing the Oversight Committee. If anyone watched, it was so horrific. They tried to bludgeon Merrick Garland, like, why do you not know more about the Hunter Biden thing? And he kept saying, and here's just a real...
What I'm wondering is why you guys let the statute of limitations lapse for those tax years that dealt with Burisma income.
This investigation was being conducted by Mr. Weiss, an appointee of President Trump. You will, at the appropriate time, have the opportunity to ask Mr. Weiss that question.
I mean, all they did through the whole hearing is like, why don't you know more about it? They were really wishing that why were you involved in it? Why would you have connections with it? And he kept saying, I've told him, Mr. Weiss, he has any resources he needs, he can have. Why is it that you appointed him special counsel? He asked for it. I gave it. They just tried and tried to, they were so bummed out that he didn't have involvement in it. And they were mad that he couldn't provide answers to it. It was the most disgraceful waste of time and just dramatics. And the same thing with Gates and all the other jerks that just kept attacking him over the Hunter Biden thing. Why don't you know more about it?
Yeah.
Jim Jordan is
not like it's
comic
a
relief.
wrestling team.
Yeah, he is.
Yeah. Jim Jordan is
I actually like
comic
the
relief.
Borowitz report issue on this. Borowitz had an article that said that Jordan is going to demand that the president tell him why he's impeaching him.
Yeah.
It is absurd. It is beyond absurd.
So we just
another
had
disgrace to my native state of Ohio. So
we just had a viewer. We just had a viewer who very, very rightly said the Grand Funk Railroad should be in the Hall of Fame. A little bit of trivia for you. Almost Famous, of course, based heavily on Cameron Crowe writing for, as a teen, Rolling Stone magazine, and Jan Wenner makes a cameo appearance in it. Stillwater, the band which is listed in the movie as being from Troy, Michigan, is actually based on Grand Funk Railroad, which is
it really?
Flint.
I didn't.
Yep.
I always heard it was based on, I don't know, somebody else, but not. I didn't know that, so that's interesting.
Yeah. So GFR. I'm glad Fishman's not here, because Fishman would have left and gone and looked it up just to go ahead and refute me. So,
Saeed, who's your schmuck of the week?
So my schmuck of the week, I had among a bunch, because I knew that it would be just too easy, is Jim Jordan. I was going to say the woman in Michigan who fell into the porta potty trying to retrieve her Apple Watch and had to be then pulled out. But I can't blame her for being a schmuck, because I think at a certain point gravity took over and she hit terminal velocity on the way down.
It was a shitty situation.
So my schmuck of the week, and part of this is because of my pre-existing issues that I have with him, is New York Times columnist David Brooks, who was complaining for paying $78 for a meal at the 1911 Smokehouse Barbecue at Newark Liberty International Airport, which of course is, I think, his most egregious offense is flying through Newark. But he says, I got a burger and fries and a shot of whiskey, and it was $78, claiming this was a shonda. But actually, the restaurant retorted and said, bro, the burger was $17. 80% of that $78 was your bar tab, because a double shot of whiskey is $20. So 17 and 20 does not equal $78 anywhere except the New York Times. So let's ramp it up to something a bit more reasonable, like maybe 3 whiskey drinks along with the burger and fries.
I'm a nervous flyer too, so I fully endorse David Brooks's strategy of getting on the plane with half of the.
And actually, I'm going to stand up for the secondary schmuck. You just mentioned Newark Airport. I grew up in New Jersey, and I remember when Newark was a horror show. Delta just moved to a really new Terminal A, and it's really nice.
Oh, that's good. Thanks for the update, Paul, because I know LaGuardia has sort of redeemed itself.
It's very similar to what happened at LaGuardia. It's a nice Sky Club, which fewer and fewer of us will be allowed to get into there. And by the way, one more schmuck of the week, the CEO of Delta
Airlines,
absolutely alienating everybody. I'm a Diamond 360. I mean, my spend is insane because I travel sometimes 150 days a year. But I'm looking forward now that if I don't do a couple internationals next year, I might not qualify. It's going to be the most lonely place on the planet.
The reason,
Paul, go ahead and throw your money over to Turkish Airlines. It's worth the extra bucks, and they will treat you like a sultan.
A sultan, yeah, right.
When they start flying out of Detroit, maybe we can do that.
November 15th.
I
happening.
specifically got the Platinum Delta Sky Miles Amex card for three things. The international travel, they no longer charge you 3% on any currency conversions that you do overseas because we're traveling more overseas. The Sky Club access and the companion certificate, and now they have taken away. And the Sky Club, I've never been to. I've only been to one Sky Club in my life. I was really
Been to
looking forward.
once. Yeah.
Yeah, but I guess I'm too much of a pleb. So there we go.
You know what I do now, Nancy? If I can't get into the lounge, I build a fort by the gate.
Good idea. I'll join you in there. So we'll get somebody to give us some bevies.
you can always find that. By the way, just one piece of news coming over the wire, who could also qualify for being a schmuck of the week. New Jersey Senator Bob Menendez, who has kind of affirmed Oscar Wilde, because to be hit with federal corruption charges once would be seen as a misfortune, but twice would be seen as reckless. Apparently, he not only took bribes, but it includes bribes in $100,000 in gold bars. Wow. So Bobby Menendez, looks like you're going to have to face some New Jersey music again.
Gold bars.
Wow.
Jeez.
Gold bars, or as we used to call them, ingots.
Ingots, yeah.
All right. Well, listen, thank you for another very spirited and very deep and fun show. Thank you, Bill Seikaly. Thank you, Paul Eisenstein. Thank you, Nancy Derringer. And thank you, and last word as always, Allan.
Drive home safely.
Take care, everybody.